Welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with CPA and personal financial specialist, Phil Putney. Now let's get rolling with today's show. Welcome into another edition of Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts. And Phil, we're back again to talk more investing, finance, and retirement. And a little DIY pitfall this week is the topic of conversation. Yep. It's a DIY world in a lot of ways the last, 15, 20 years, right? It
is. Yeah, with the growth of YouTube, it's, if you want to figure out how to do something, go to YouTube.
You can look up just about anything, yeah. I did it once to repair my dryer myself and to change out the computer board in the dryer, and it worked just fine. So, you never know.
Yep.
But let's talk about that from a financial standpoint, because there's certainly no shortage of content out there financially speaking, just like our own. Difference is you are licensed and, and regulated, and you have to follow the rules and all that stuff, right? So there's a lot that don't. Let's be honest.
Yeah, it's an interesting world we live in now. The information is almost too available, and sometimes can be confusing because you get all this contradictory information. That to me is one of the big differences. And your dryer is a great example, right?
Yeah.
It is a very fixed. Things don't change. This is what it is, right? This is the problem. Let's look it up on YouTube, and somebody else has probably had the problem. And if they have, this is what we did, and, fix it.
Yeah.
And what happens if you get it wrong? You spend an extra whatever for the board or whatever it is, but still, at least you tried it.
Right.
So the downside to trying to do it yourself and fix it isn't that great.
Very true. It's interesting the way you brought that up. It made me think about something. My wife a couple of years ago had gotten really sick and was in the hospital a couple of weeks. And I kept going to the doctors going, why can't you guys figure this out or get this solved? And, he looked at me and he's like, well, that's unfortunately why it's called practicing medicine. And I thought, wow, I was like, but I had open heart surgery, prior to this. And I was in and out of the hospital in 3 days. And he's like, well, honestly, I hate to sound like, I'm not trying to sound crude, but think of it this way. You had a plumbing problem and they fixed it. They knew exactly what to fix. We're trying to locate, understand, we're trying to deal with it, and I thought, well, that's kind of interesting, but it stumps people sometimes. And I think financially, to kind of bring this back around, we're in this environment where there is so much information and you think, I can apply this strategy and it should work just fine because it's worked for these other people. However, your body, your life, your whatever is different, just like the doc thing than somebody else's issue. So kind of with that said, Phil, let's talk a little bit about some of the hurdles. When somebody does come to you and they're like, hey, listen, I've been doing the DIY thing, but I'm up, I'm kind of, my head's against the wall now. I'm kind of stumped. What are some of the catalysts that brought them to you?
Well, so there's two stages to investing. Right, for retirement. The accumulation phase, which is what most people have probably done the DIY themselves, right? You're in the 401k. There's only so many options. You're picking options based on risk or however you do it. And there are still some potential downsides if you pick the wrong funds or whatever the case is. But at the end of the day, there's not as many moving parts, and that is so often the thing that we've heard when we've taught classes and we start to go through all the factors that play into retirement, that it's a different world. When you get to that second phase, that decumulation phase where you're starting to spend it down, right? Accumulation, it's a matter of how much can you save, right? And 401k limits, what does your budget allow you to do? Investment options, again, pretty simple. You're locked into what that plan has, unless you have some outside funds, and it's a little bit more complex because now you've got, so to speak, the world open of investments. Right. But still, even then, it's just a matter of how much and what. On the flip side, when you get to the unwinding of this, the decumulation, I've built this retirement fund. Well, how do I now turn that into income? And that's where all these different factors come into play, because now you have income from other sources too. Yeah. So you've got Social Security minimum, maybe you've got a pension, in our neck of the woods, we still have a lot of auto worker retirees that have pensions, so now we've got options there we've got to factor in. And the other thing that always changes when you get into retirement is taxes.
Okay.
Again, it's pretty simple when you're working. It's your W-2. There's only so much you can do anymore, right? With the high standard deduction we have today, so there's not a lot you can do from a tax standpoint. When you get to the retirement side, a whole different ballgame, because taxes are much more controllable there if you look at it from a long-term perspective. So, so that's really I think to me, the biggest difference is that the variables involved are there's more of them, and they all interact. I often in class when I'm kind of wrapping it up and saying at the end of the day, retirement's like a thumbprint, right? Everyone has it. Has one. It looks pretty similar, but it's different. Same thing in retirement. Everyone has income of some sort. You at least have Social Security, maybe a pension. Everyone's got investments, but how are they invested? You've got the taxable, tax deferred, tax free. We've talked about the 3 different tax buckets. What should that blend look like? Yeah. And at the end of the day, how the two of those interact and the income you take out, well, that affects your taxes.
Yep. Yeah.
And when you look at those 3 interconnected circles, as you change one, it changes the other. And so it's no longer just a matter of, well, I can put, $1,000 a month away and here's the fund I'm putting it in.
Yeah, I said a bunch of times on here that through the years that I don't know if universalism is a word, but there's these universal things that affect us all, right? And so to your point, but how you play it out is different. And I asked you how, like some of the catalysts that bring people to you. What do you think some of the catalysts are that have people DIYing it themselves? I think part of it's the technology, right? There's a lot of stuff out there that makes it easy to do. And certainly there's a lot more resources, but I think at some point, and you kind of illustrated this really well, is that, whatever the reason that's got you in the and I think the other big ones, by the way, too, is they think it's the cost, right? It's going to cost me too much to work with somebody, but let's talk about the value of that, because, value is inherent to whatever it is that you're doing. If you're getting good value, then the price is worth it.
Yeah. So, on the DIY standpoint, especially if you've been a DIY person, accumulation, investing the money, you're using index funds, very low cost, right? But again, there's really no one managing that strategy. It's just invested in the market. You're getting whatever the market does. And there's not all these other variables. It's simply return. Well, when you get to retirement, return's important, but that is, to me, not the most important aspect. There's many other more important aspects that you can control. Number one is taxes. So the fee, sure, you could do DIY it yourself, pick some funds, low cost funds, let's say, and just manage investments. Right. But what happens from a tax aspect? Do you understand not just today, but that long-term tax picture? Mm-hmm. And even though your quote unquote fees are going to be lower, at the end of the day, you're going to end up paying significantly more in taxes. It happens all the time. Yeah. When we're working with clients, we always run what we call that baseline scenario when we're doing the financial planning. And that is their idea. We always say, well, what does retirement look like to you? What was your plan? Filing for Social Security at this age, I'm taking this money out. Okay, let's run that. Here is your scenario. Mm-hmm. Here's the tax picture in your scenario. Now let's look at our plan and some options and how we can better manipulate that blend of those retirement assets in the tax buckets, maybe timing of Social Security and pensions, and dramatically change that long-term picture in the tax scenario. So, taxes is just one of them. Kind of some of the catalysts is when they start to see all the variables and then the actual reality of what can be done from a tax aspect is no longer simply just picking a fund and taking a distribution.
The Tax Smart Retiree is your comprehensive guide to mastering tax efficiency for a flourishing retirement. You will find indispensable advice and actionable strategies designed to enhance tax savings, maximize Social Security benefits, protect against market volatility, and develop a customized retirement plan. To get your free ebook, click the link in the show notes of today's episode and download your copy of the Tax Smart Retiree right now.
Yeah, I think the big catalyst there, Phil, and you definitely hit them, is certainly, people are doing it themselves. Maybe they're doing a great job. It's easier to build that money, like you said, but the preservation preservation phase, the distribution phase, how they all play together, where you're pulling your income from, when you're pulling it, how it affects the taxation, how it affects your income levels, which then triggers Medicare issues. There's all these different things that you're just not thinking about that stuff because you haven't had to. And could you go find it? Let's finish it off with this. Could you go find the information just like you did to build the wealth and do it yourself, the preservation phase? Yeah, you can. Right? Do you want to?
I mean, there's all sorts of videos out there on these different topics, right? You want to learn about IRMA, Medicare, IRMA,
right.
Sure.
But do you want to, Phil? That's that's
is
the
that
thing.
what you want?
Is that what you want 65 to be? Right? Or 60 or 62 or 67 or whatever. And furthermore, if you're a couple, does your spouse want that to be, right? Because especially if you're doing it and they're not doing it and they could give a rat's patoot about it. And then, what's going to happen is you're going to die and they're going to be, I don't want to do this, right? So that's the other thing I think that drives DIYers finally to a financial and a retirement specialist.
Yeah. And that is another catalyst often that comes up is it's funny. I'll have more often than not, and not to be sexist, but we'll have the wife of the couple, right, drag their husband, so to speak, to the class. Yes. And then all of a sudden their eyes are open and it's really the wife because she's the one that probably isn't taking care of the finances, right? The husband.
Which is so weird because, it's so weird because most wives have run the budget in the household all through life, but the retirement part, it seems to be the difference. Now it has been changing for the better the last couple of years, which is great.
Yeah. But it's often one side of the couple and it doesn't matter who, but you'll have one that's managing more of the investments, and that's the case is that, maybe they enjoy it. It's something they've dabbled with throughout the years.
Right.
And, I don't mind doing that in retirement, but do you understand all the interactions and what happens if something happens to you?
Exactly.
And that is often kind of the catalyst that will bring them into working with a financial advisor is the other spouse is saying, yeah, that's great. I'm glad you enjoy it, but I want to do travel. I want to do, and I don't want you on your phone. I don't want you on your computer every day, checking the markets and doing this and doing that. Let's do what we do in retirement. In that type of a scenario, often a great solution is for that individual that has enjoyed the DIY. Here, let's carve off a portion of the money and there's your DIY fund. Have at it, but whatever happens there, let's make sure that it's not going to change or, potentially put at risk your overall retirement plan.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. At the end of the day, right, DIY certainly has its place. There's a lot of things but like a lot of things, Phil, I think at some point we realize, okay, this is more than I can chew. I've bitten off more than I can chew. I need some help. I just had a bunch of work done to the AC. Could I have probably done it? Sure. My brother and I probably could have tackled it, but I wanted it to be right. Could I have built my own deck? Yeah, but I wanted it to be level, when I walked around on it. Right. So we turn to professionals for a reason.
Yep. And I tell clients all the time, look, you retire once, hopefully, right? I mean, it's not something you do on a regular basis. Right. What I do is help clients retire. I mean, I do this day in and day out. So I've not seen everything, but I've seen the vast majority of the different components and how they work together. So your scenario is going to be very similar to somebody else's scenario. So I understand how these things work together.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. So we'll wrap it up there. Thanks for hanging out with us here on Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts. Look, if you're DIYing it and you're killing it, great. Kudos. Good job. Have you considered, at least talking to a financial professional, especially if you're getting closer to retirement, to see what you might miss or see what you might not know or how things play together, maybe how you could be more effective, especially on the tax side of things. Of course, Phil being a CPA, and a financial specialist, he's looking at both sides of those coins. So do yourself a favor, have those conversations, especially when they're complimentary consultations and chats to see what you might be missing and if maybe it's a good fit for you. As always, if you need that help, reach out to Phil. We have links in the show descriptions below, whether it's on audio or video podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Apple or Spotify or right here on YouTube with that subscribe button, little thumbs up there and notification bell to catch new episodes when they come out. And Phil, thanks for hanging out, breaking it down, my friend. Have yourself a great week.
All right. Take care.
We'll see you next time here on Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts.
Phil? investment advisory services offered through AFS Wealth Management. The content of this program is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. Investments and/or investment strategies involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will achieve its objectives.